There's a word for what we're about to do: apostasy. Sounds heavy, like something whispered in dark corners, something dangerous. But what does it actually mean? Hi there, I'm Dave, and I've been a language and literature educator for over a decade now. I'm here to do a deep dive with you into religious stories, examining them through a literary lens. Welcome to the Literal Apostate. Apostasy, from the Greek apostasia, meaning to stand away, to defect. Peel back another layer, and you'll find something older. In the ancient world, an apostate wasn't just someone who abandoned their faith. They were an escaped slave. Someone who slipped their chains, stepped beyond the walls that once confined them, and never looked back. Think about that. An apostate isn't just someone who rejects a belief. There's someone who escapes it. And that's what we're here to do. Not just to critique these old stories, but to liberate ourselves from them. Or at least from the idea that they must be taken at face value. Before we begin with the beginning, let's talk about why we're doing this. And later, we'll begin with the begetting. You might be wondering, why the literal apostate? Well, for one, we're taking these stories literally. Not in the fundamentalist God said it, therefore it happened, that settles it kind of way. More in the let's actually read what's there kind of way. We're not here to bow our heads and close our eyes. We're here with our heads up and vision clear to examine the text, its contradictions, its origins. Because when you actually treat the Bible as a collection of stories written by real people with real agendas, things start to get messy. And what better place to start than in the beginning? If you're going to tell a story, you might as well start with a banger. And what's more iconic than in the beginning? It's the ultimate hook. Short, dramatic, mysterious. The kind of opening that makes you lean in and think, all right, I'm listening. Genesis doesn't waste time. No slow buildup, no prelude, just the biggest mic drop in literary history. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Bang! Scene set. Universe loaded. Let's go. But right away, we have to ask, what does that even mean? In the beginning of what exactly? Time? Space? Everything? The original Hebrew here is Bereshit, bara Elohim et hasashamayim v'et haaretz. And already we're in murky waters. All right, heretics, time to pull out your glossary and start taking notes. We'll be building this little blasphemous dictionary as we go, so you might as well make it official. This word has been hiding in plain sight for centuries. Let's ruin it. First up, bara. It's usually translated as created, but here's the catch. It's a verb that, in the Hebrew Bible, is only ever used with God as the subject. Humans don't bara anything. They asa, which means to make or fashion something from existing materials. But bara, that's divine territory. Some take this to mean creation ex nihilo, out of nothing. But ancient Jewish thought didn't necessarily see it that way. In other Near Eastern myths, creation was about bringing order to chaos, not popping reality into existence like a cosmic magic trick. And speaking of cosmic, let's talk about Elohim. Elohim is a plural noun that technically means gods. But in this context, it's used to refer to a singular supreme deity. The priestly authors favored this term because their god was distant, transcendent, and frankly, too holy to have casual conversations with humans. Yahweh Elohim, on the other hand, is a personal name combined with God. The Yahwist writers wanted a deity who was up close and personal, one who walked in the garden, formed Adam with his hands, and later, spoiler alert, got mad about people eating fruit. Yeah, we'll get to that mess next time. These aren't minor storytelling quirks, these are seams, evidence that we're looking at two different traditions stitched together by later editors. Now, if you spent any time in Sunday school classroom, you've probably been handed a version of Genesis that conveniently ignores all these contradictions. The idea is that these two stories fit together like a beautiful, seamless tapestry. But when you actually read them side by side, it's more like a poorly patched quilt where the colors don't quite match. Let's say you're an editor trying to stitch these accounts together into a single coherent story. You start with Genesis 1, a methodical, 6-day cosmic construction project where everything happens in a precise order. But then you hit Genesis 2, where suddenly man is created before the plants and animals. And just like that, your whole timeline is a mess. Do you go back and rewrite one to match the other? Do you gloss over the differences and hope nobody notices? Or do you just hand wave it away with God works in mysterious ways? In Genesis 1, the order of creation is clear. Day 1, light. Day 2, sky and water separation. Day 3, land, plants. Day 4, sun, moon, and stars. Yes, light existed before the sun. Just roll with it. Day 5, sea creatures and birds. Day 6, land animals, then humanity, male and female together. Simple, structured, logical. Then Genesis 2 comes along and says, oh no, actually the land was barren when Adam was created, and animals were made after him to be his potential companions. Suddenly our cosmic blueprint turns into an earthy improvisation session where God is figuring things out as he goes along. Time for another entry into the Heretics Glossary. This one's a fun one. Toledot. This Hebrew word means generations or account of origins, and it's often used as a marker in biblical text to introduce a new section of storytelling. It's also how ancient scribes signaled that they were piecing together older traditions into a single continuous narrative, kind of like a biblical previously on. That means Genesis itself is telling us that these stories were never meant to be a single seamless tale. They were inherited from different traditions and woven together by later editors. So when someone insists that Genesis gives us one unified history of creation, well, they might want to check their own source material. This patchwork approach wasn't unique to the Bible. Ancient Mesopotamian texts, like the Enuma Elish, also compiled multiple versions of divine creation. The difference? They didn't try to pretend it was all one harmonious, divinely dictated story from the start. They just told their myths as they were, contradictions and all. Coming soon to a fundamentalist bookstore near you. So, what do we do with all of this? Do we throw the whole thing out? Not necessarily. Recognizing these contradictions doesn't mean dismissing the stories. It means reading them honestly, seeing them for what they are. A messy, human attempt to understand the cosmos, not an infallible blueprint for reality. And if Genesis starts out this disjointed, well, just wait until we get to the rest of the Bible. But before we do that, let's see how the Israelites' creation myth stacks up against its neighbors. You see, the Israelites weren't exactly writing in a vacuum. Their creation story didn't just drop out of the sky fully formed. It has, let's call them, family resemblances to other ancient myths. And once you start looking at those, things get very interesting. Because if you thought the contradictions within Genesis were something, wait till you see how it measures up to its mythological cousins. As I said, Genesis wasn't written in a vacuum. The ancient world was packed with creation stories, some strikingly similar to the Bible's version, others wildly different. And when we line them up, we start to see a bigger picture. Because when you boil them down, most creation myths' ingredients, chaos and clay. Out of the void, something must take shape. Out of dust, life must emerge. The details change, but the themes, they stick. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation myth, opens in a world of chaotic primordial waters. Sound familiar? Their god, Marduk, creates order by slaying the sea dragon Tiamat and carving the world from her body, the heavens from her skull, the earth from her corpse. It's violent, dramatic, and deeply political, because it also justifies why Babylon and its kings were chosen by the gods to rule. Now, Genesis 1 also starts with primordial waters and a god imposing order. But there's a key difference. There's no dragon to slay, no cosmic battle. Elohim simply speaks, and creation obeys. Genesis strips away the divine warfare, replacing it with something more serene and absolute. Less might makes right, and more because I said so. And that shift, it tells us a lot about the people who wrote it. Egypt had multiple creation stories, but one of the most well-known also begins with chaotic waters. Noon, the dark abyss. Their creator god, Atum, emerges and forms the world. Sometimes through sheer will, sometimes through, well, bodily fluids. Let's just say the book of Genesis decided to take the PG-rated approach. Egyptian cosmology reinforced the divine authority of the pharaoh. Just as Atum created the world, the pharaoh was seen as a living god, responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the cosmic order. Their myths weren't just stories, they were state propaganda. But not all creation myths begin with water. In Norse mythology, there was only an empty, frozen void. The first being, Ymir, was formed from ice and fire, and from his dismembered body, the world was built. Like the Babylonians, they saw creation as the result of conflict, a brutal, primal act, rather than a peaceful decree. The Norse didn't have kings chosen by gods. They had gods who fought for dominance, much like the warlords and clans who told these stories. Their mythology reflected their worldview. The world was forged in struggle, and survival meant embracing that struggle. Meanwhile, many indigenous American myths center around the earth being formed on the back of a great animal, often a turtle. These stories emphasize harmony between humans and nature, a stark contrast to Genesis, where humanity is explicitly given dominion over the earth. Take the Iroquois creation story. Sky Woman falls from the heavens and is saved by animals who create land on the back of a great turtle. Here, creation isn't about domination or divine right, it's about coexistence and reciprocity. The earth isn't something to rule, it's something to be cared for. And then we have the Hindu creation stories, which add an entirely different layer: cyclical time. Unlike Genesis, which tells a one-time act of creation, Hindu mythology describes a universe that is created, destroyed, and reborn in an eternal cycle. One version tells of Brahma emerging from a lotus growing out of Vishnu as he sleeps on the cosmic serpent Shisha, dreaming the universe into existence. Another, in the Nasadya Sukta, one of the oldest hymns in the Rig Veda, takes a much more abstract approach, admitting that no one, not even the gods, may truly know how the universe began. It's a far cry from Genesis, where the answer is delivered with absolute certainty. Hindu cosmology embraces uncertainty, even paradox, in a way that monotheistic traditions rarely do. Let's add another term to the heretics' glossary: Chaoskampf. It's a fancy German word meaning struggle against chaos, and it's a recurring theme in ancient mythology. You see it in the Enuma Elish when Marduk slays Tiamat. In Norse myths, when Odin and his brothers kill Ymir, and even in Greek myths, when Zeus battles the serpent Typhon. Genesis, it erases the struggle. No battles, no divine warfare, just spoken command. And that tells us something. This was a text written to assert a very different kind of power. Despite their differences, all these myths answer the same questions. Where did we come from? Who put us here? And what does that mean for us? But they don't just explain existence, they justify authority. They establish who gets to rule, who must obey, and what the natural order of the world should be. Which brings us to the real power of Genesis. Not in whether it's true, but in what it was designed to do. Creation myths don't just explain existence, they justify power. They tell people where they come from, yes, but more importantly, they tell people who's in charge. And the Genesis creation story, it's one of the most effective power plays in history. As we've highlighted, by comparison to the chaos comp inherent in other creation myths, there's a distinct lack of conflict in Genesis, replaced by unquestioned obedience to the authority of God. This is not a theological choice, it's a political one. Because Genesis wasn't just a story, it was an origin myth for a people trying to define themselves. The ancient Israelites lived in a world dominated by empires: Egypt, Babylon, Assyria. Their neighbors all had creation myths that justified the divine right of kings, gods choosing rulers, legitimizing conquests, declaring might makes right. But Genesis does something different. It removes kings from the equation entirely. In Egypt, the pharaoh was a god. In Mesopotamia, kings ruled as divine representatives. But in Genesis, no human is given divine status. Power isn't concentrated in one ruler. It's handed down through a covenant, a sacred agreement between God and his people. And that shift lays the groundwork for an identity built around religious law rather than monarchy. Instead of divine kings handing down laws, you get a priestly class interpreting divine will. Instead of royal lineage, you get chosen lineage, Abraham's covenant passed down through generations. Which means authority isn't tied to conquest or bloodlines, but to obedience and divine favor. Now, as part of this divine covenant, Abraham gets a promise: land, descendants, and divine favor. Sounds great, right? Small catch, there's a membership fee. Yep, the sign of this holy contract is circumcision. And before you ask, no, Abraham did not get a trial period. Imagine explaining that to your followers. Good news, everyone! God has chosen us. Bad news? Well, you might want to sit down for this. Fast forward a few centuries and this idea gets repurposed. The same Genesis story that once decentralized power is used by later rulers to justify their own divine right. Monarchs claim to rule by the will of God, not by sheer force. Clergy become kingmakers, and suddenly, that once egalitarian covenant is a tool of control. And it doesn't stop in the ancient world. Genesis has been used to justify everything from feudalism to slavery to modern-day nationalism. If God created a natural order, then anyone challenging that order, whether it's political rebels, heretics, or even scientists, isn't just defying rulers, they are defying God. So when we ask what Genesis was designed to do, the answer is bigger than just explain where we come from. It was, and still is, used to define who gets to rule, who must obey, and why challenging that is seen as dangerous. If creation myths tell us who's in charge, then stories about forbidden knowledge tell us what happens when you question that authority. And if there's one thing that unites these stories, it's that stepping outside the lines, asking the wrong questions, seeking the wrong truths always comes with consequence. From Prometheus stealing fire to Eve taking that first bite, the lesson is typically the same. Knowledge is dangerous. It disrupts, it challenges, it liberates. And for those who want to keep control, that makes it the greatest threat of all. And that brings us to the story, the one we'll be dissecting in full next episode. Adam, Eve, a talking serpent, and a tree that apparently contains all the knowledge humanity wasn't supposed to have. It's the ultimate cautionary tale, or, depending on how you look at it, the ultimate jailbreak story. So, what does all of this mean? If Genesis contains two different creation accounts, what does that tell us about its origins? And if these stories echo myths from older traditions, what does that mean for their divine inspiration? These are the questions we'll keep asking as we move through more stories in the book of Genesis and more. Because reading these texts critically, understanding their history, and reclaiming our own narratives, that's the real Exodus. Remember, an apostate isn't just a heretic, it's an escaped slave, and there's no shame in running toward the truth. In the next episode, we take a long, hard look at the first humans, naked, afraid, and about to make the most controversial snack choice in history. Was it truly the fall of man, or the moment humanity actually stood up? I'll see you in the next chapter. Just maybe don't take fruit from talking reptiles in the meantime.